A walk, a journey, an experience of a lifetime. This week we're back to learn more about the 88 Temples pilgrimage here on Supernatural Japan. Supernatural Japan number 8, the 88 Temples pilgrimage, part 2. Well, hey there, everyone, and welcome back to episode number 8 of the Supernatural Japan podcast. My name is Kevin O'Shea, and I am your host. And this week, we have part 2 of our chat with Kevin Tarpey, all about his adventure as he moves forward in the 88 Temples pilgrimage. If this is your first time listening to the Supernatural Japan podcast here at episode number 8, I'm going to say stop right now and go back to episode 7. Please listen to episode 7 first, and then come back here to episode number 8. That's the best way to do it. This is a part 2, and to really kind of understand what's going on, you'll need to listen to episode number 7. So before we jump into this week's episode, thank you so much for all of you amazing people out there who have been listening to the Supernatural Japan podcast and supporting this show. Sorry about being a few days late with this episode, but sometimes that's just what happens, and it's part of the nature of the podcasting beast, but here we are. So last week, we chatted with Kevin Tarpey about his experience as he started the 88 Temples pilgrimage in Shikoku in Japan, and this week we continue. And last we heard, Kevin was about to use a walking stick as a defensive weapon. I wonder, what could this be all about?
Yeah. So I wanted to do it all in one go, as you know.
Yeah.
But even though Corona is still around, COVID, Golden Week. Golden Week is the worst time to travel because everybody in Japan seems to be traveling.
Oh, yeah.
So I decided to come back to Shimane. I didn't want to deal with because it's been so lovely. There's been so few of us pilgrims, and even people in general at these temples. Probably 85% of the ones I visit, it's so serene and so peaceful because there's few people on the grounds of the temple. So I didn't want to have a week where that's been flipped on its head, and now it's like being at a Disneyland with the crowds. It's kind of off-putting, especially after having such lovely conditions.
Yeah.
I'm currently home in Shimane for Golden Week, and tomorrow I'm heading back down.
Yeah. So you're heading back. I know we've been having a great talk, but I mean, there's something you alluded to earlier, and I do want to get a few more stories. But you had mentioned something about a walking stick and it being a potentially good defensive weapon, not just a souvenir. Let us know.
In Japanese, it's called the Kongo Zue. I've started calling it my kukai stick because that's who it's supposed to represent affectionately. I call it my kukai stick. So one day I was walking along the coast of Kochi. Again, I don't know if this is even considered the official route. I think it was one of those days where it's like, that coastal road, it's got promise. I envision sea vistas, cliffs descending down to the ocean, waves crashing into those cliffs. I think I'm going to take this. So at one point, sure enough, I was right. It was lovely, beautiful views. There was even observation pull-offs for the few cars that drive on this road. And I stopped at one of them for lunch. And along some of these locations, I noticed there's a lot of feral cats.
Okay.
Particularly in Kochi Prefecture. So I think I had gone to a bakery the day before. So I had one of those bacon cheese baked sandwich thingies. And I'm eating that. I'm keeping an eye on the cats, kind of scrounging around, making sure they're not going to make a run for the other food I've got on the rock I'm sitting at. And I'm eating this thing. All of a sudden, I feel a swoosh of air and hear a whoosh. And I kind of jerk away. And sure enough, it's a toby, a black kite.
Ah.
One of those large birds.
Yeah.
Swooped down to try to swipe my bacon and cheese baked good thingy. So it goes back up and it's now circling probably 5-8 meters above my head.
That's a big bird.
And I take my stick, I start shouting, swinging it. It swooped down one or two more times, and I kind of swung, and eventually it flew away. The kukai stick, I'm thinking it saved me.
That's it.
And then maybe about 2-3 minutes later, I hear that distinctive it's kind of like a horse whinnying, the black kite cry.
Yeah.
I heard it and I was like, oh no, it's back. And I look up. Oh, not only is it back, it's brought 2 or 3 friends with him. So I just kind of wolfed down the rest of that sandwich. I was like, you guys win. I'm out of here. I'm taking off. Black kites.
On a side note, the black kite was my spark bird that got me into birding, by the way. That was the bird.
I love them.
That was a bird that got me when I first moved to Japan. I grew up with 2 birders.
Well, I did love them.
Until they tried to steal your bacon sandwich.
Well, I love them around here, but they're so, I don't want to say skittish, but they don't allow me to get too close to them.
Yeah, skittish is
around
probably
here. So
they're safe.
Funny.
Yeah, I think it depends on I can remember years ago, because again, I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I'd worked in Akashi, and right along, I mean, that's right on the water, right on the inland sea. And then across, you've got Awaji Island. And I can remember seeing news stories, literally like evening news when I'd be at home, where those black kites, the Toby, were like viciously attacking picnickers and people at the rest stops, the highway rest stops right by the water. And there's all these video clips showing like the Tobys flying down and like literally grabbing bento boxes and onigiri out of people's hands and flying off. So they're opportunists, and they say that's one of the that's one of the reasons why they're such successful birds, because they're not picky. They'll eat an onigiri, they'll eat a fish.
Sure. And I'm wondering too if, like, say the ones I'm seeing around here, the prey are so plentiful, they would have no need to.
And that's probably why. Because I can remember actually. Here we go, guys. It's bird time, everyone. Supernatural bird time. But I can remember years ago being with my wife along the waterfront in Kobe, by Kobe Gakuen University, walking along this boardwalk, and we stopped and stood, and we were watching one of these black kites. And by the way, folks, this is a large raptor. It's a very big brown raptor. A lot of people mistake them as eagles. And we
wingspan.
It's a huge wingspan. And we watched this Toby fly down to the water, and it reached out its talons, grabbed a fish, flew up in the sky about 20 meters, and just dropped the fish into the water. And then it flew back down and grabbed another fish. And it was literally just playing. And it was like, okay, if
practicing.
If you can do this, if you can afford to practice with your time, it's pretty easy to fill that belly. So maybe that's what's going on with the black kites in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and again, like I was saying, this particular location, dramatic cliffs, steep cliffs dropping down to the ocean. The waves are it was quite turbulent. So I don't know if that
maybe
limited, thick forest. The rest of, it's not easy hunting in a thick forest. Whereas where I live, it's tons of the tambo, the rice fields.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Lots of frogs and things to catch.
Exactly. And much better visibility.
Whereas where you were in Kochi, they have to rely on bacon sandwiches.
Yeah, exactly. I should have probably left an offering. That's probably what Kukai would have done.
Yeah.
Leave it on the rock and get walking.
I was wondering, have you had any other interesting encounters, tales, things you've...
Well, the Osetai has been quite interesting.
What is Osetai?
One in particular, again, Osetai is the gift giving.
Okay.
And one in particular, there's a stretch in Kochi where I think it's the second longest stretch in between temples. You're walking down to Muroto Cape, and that particular stretch is kind of notorious or infamous in the Henro community because there's very little infrastructure till you get to the tip of that cape where the next temple is.
Okay.
Even in Japan, a land renowned for vending machines. At one point, I walked by
convenience stores.
Yeah, and convenience stores. There's no convenience stores along this 30-kilometer, maybe one, But
oh my God, this is Inaka.
one vending machine, somebody had put up a sign, just so you know, the next one is not for 10 kilometers.
Oh my God. It's kind of like in America going through the desert and seeing one of those gas stations that's like your last chance for gas.
Exactly. And I did have I think I had a coffee about 2 hours before. I was like, well, I might as well have another one. I don't know. What if I never make it to the next vending machine? This might be my last chance. So there's very little infrastructure, but at the same time, you're on this coastal road. Again, to your right are like these forested hills or cliffs, and to your left is just ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And the waves there, maybe because some kind of current or the local tide. Oh, I felt like a kid just washing. I'd be waiting for certain waves, like, oh, this one's going to be good. This one's going to really crash into the rocks, and just watching the surf explode. But anyways, I'm walking along. I'm probably about 30 minutes to an hour into that desolate stretch. And I decided, rather than typically I'll walk on the side where the traffic is coming towards me, because at least you can see the cars coming. I walked on the other side so I could be right by the ocean. I wanted to be close to the ocean as possible. And at one point I hear the very loud squeak of a truck braking behind me. So I thought maybe it was a guy telling me, you're on the wrong side of the road. It's dangerous. You should get on the other side. But no, the truck driver got out of the truck. He said, oh, Henro-san, Mr. Pilgrim, this is for you. And he had a plastic bag, and inside were 2 rice balls, a bottle of water, 2 chocolate nut snacks, and maybe 20 of those small hard candies. It was osetai. And
wow.
He gets back. But the crazy thing is, he gets back in the truck and immediately pulls into a pull-off and turns around and goes back in the direction he came. So what that means is, I realized he must have driven past me maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes earlier, saw me, knew how tough of a stretch this was, because maybe that was his regular delivery route for whatever truck company he worked for.
Yeah.
He then continued to drive, and I knew from a fact from that point, it was probably 15 kilometers at least to the last convenience store where he could have bought that stuff, to the last supermarket. So he drove that 15 kilometers, purchased the stuff, then drove back to where I was walking to deliver it. So he took that much time out of his work day.
Wow.
Not free time. He was clearly working. It was the middle of the day to give me that stuff. And those kind of, the osetai, the gift giving, it changes you. It makes you want to be kind. It makes you want to do that for me. And little did he know, it ended up being probably the most fun day I've had on the pilgrimage. It was just so unbelievably raw and beautiful, that coast of Moroto Cape. But at that point, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I still kind of myself, I was like, oh, this is going to be a tough stretch of walking. And that particular day as well, I can take the story further. I stayed at a guest house that was run by a Japanese woman and her Spanish husband.
Okay.
The Spanish husband cooked Spanish cuisine for the guest house. So after walking, I think it was over 30 kilometers that day, I was tired. My feet were throbbing. I had to pay extra for it, but I got served a full paella course set.
Nice.
You're in a part of Japan where there's 10 kilometers between vending machines. And in this part of Japan, I'm having it was phenomenal food. And they just opened the guest house, if I remember correctly, in January. And I think I was the first foreign guest. So the guy was so excited. Not only was I a foreigner, but a somewhat similar situation to him, a foreigner married to a Japanese wife, living in a very rural, of course, he was living in a much more rural, desolate part. So he gave me, she told me when she served the food, he's giving you extra food, just so you know, because he's just so happy to, run into, or I guess I ran into him. I was the one doing the walking, but it was just an absolutely amazing day. I mean, there's just been so many cool things. The wildlife you see, whether it's the birds or tanuki, you'll see inoshishi, the wild boar, every once in a while. But just so many moments. For example, one thing I've noticed with some of us walking pilgrim and just people in general, they seem to kind of create a hierarchy. The walking pilgrim is kind of at the top because they're doing, theirs is much more arduous. There's much more aesthetic training. They kind of, and I think that's malarkey. And I can tell you a story why I think that's a bunch of BS. If you start from Temple 1, which is kind of the traditional way, which is what I did, you can start from anywhere. But if you start from Temple 1, one kind of notorious day is from Temple 11 to I think it's Temple 12. It's one of those days where you're actually hiking. You're on a hiking trail.
Oh, okay.
And it's a roller coaster of a day. You go up to a ridge, you descend back down. You go up to another ridge, you descend back down. You go up once more up a mountain where that temple actually is. And then you have to continue on to your lodging for the day. So you end up doing about 1,000 meters of elevation gain. And who knows how much, when you're descending down. So it's a pretty tough day. It's like a day on the Appalachian Trail.
I was going to say, it sounds like the Appalachian Trail. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you get to this temple, Shosanji, and the approach is these pretty new, a series of concrete, it looks like. I don't know what they were made of. Stone sculptures, Buddhist sculptures, gorgeous sculptures. And then you get to the temple itself, old buildings, I don't know how old, huge cedar trees, like I'm talking massive, like probably hundreds of years old, beautiful temple grounds. And I ended up spending an hour there before going to my accommodation. Such a beautiful spot. But when I was leaving, there was a husband and wife. And this woman, I'm guessing she might have been terminally ill or clearly had some kind of health ailment, because even just the short steps from the approach pathway to the next level of the temple grounds, she was wheezing, and it was such a struggle for her just to get up those steps. And I'm assuming I know for a fact they walked from the parking lot because I saw them drive past me when I was walking my lodging later. So anyways, she's struggling so much. Now, I just did, I don't know how many kilometers. I think it was a 30-kilometer day, 1,000 meters elevation gain. But this woman was struggling so much more. It was so much harder for what she was doing compared to what I just did comparatively.
Yeah.
How dare I, as the walking pilgrim, think that I'm doing the harder? I'm just more deserving of the merit of the good karma than this woman who clearly it's so much tougher. The little bit of the walk from the car. It was really a moment that kind of put things in perspective.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a Buddhist pilgrimage. I don't understand these people who
have a hierarchy.
Get arrogant.
Yeah.
It's Buddhist. Humility is kind of, so many religions, that's kind of a core concept. But yeah, I just don't get it. But yeah, there's just been so many cool experiences. And the thing is, as I was saying, I'm on a break. Yeah. I'm not even half done.
Yeah.
I'm probably a third done. I think about a week or two, maybe a week and a half after I restart, I'll officially reach the geographical or the mile or the kilometer halfway point.
Okay. So, this has been a great conversation so far, and we're going to have another one when you're done everything. But I know you've got to go tomorrow. So I'm just to kind of wrap things up. I'm just curious. So you're back on the trail tomorrow, or you're heading off to the trail tomorrow. So moving forward, how much longer are you anticipating it's going to take you to complete the whole 88 temples? I'm
guessing I'll probably finish in early to mid-June.
Okay.
Again, I'm the type of person, the way I'm approaching the pilgrimage, if there's something interesting, but it's a little bit out of the way,
yeah,
I'm willing to spend some hours going there, or if it's a museum and it's that kind of museum, I'm willing to spend an hour or two to do it. So that's why I'm kind of taking it at a slower pace. And the other thing about it too is traditionally when you get to Temple 88, you're not finished.
Okay.
There's this concept of closing the circle. So what many pilgrims do and what I intend to do is you continue walking back to Temple 1. I think it only adds another day of walking, or maybe 2. But you return to the place you started. Okay. But wait, there's more. There's also another tradition of after you've successfully finished the pilgrimage, you go to Koyasan, which is
Wakayama. It's Wakayama.
Yes. Yeah. It's a huge temple complex founded by
same
Kukai.
Dude.
Yes. And his mausoleum is there.
I've never been there. I've never been to
And I haven't either.
Yeah.
So my hope is if I successfully complete the pilgrimage to go with my wife. So from the pilgrimage, because there is a ferry, because Temple 1 is in Tokushima City, basically. There's a ferry from Tokushima City to to Wakayama, and then I think it's just a short train ride away. So you easily can get there in a day rather than taking a train maybe up to a major city, and then so that's my hope if I successfully completed to do that, because it would just be really great to have my wife come down.
Yeah.
We'll maybe spend a night in Tokushima, kind of let's go out, have a nice dinner, and then maybe a night or two in Mount Koyasan.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's so many things I'm looking forward to just in the week ahead. It's the longest stretch to the most remote temple, another cape in Kochi Prefecture. But what's interesting about this location, a man I just have such a fascination with in Japanese history, John Manjiro. He goes by many names, but I don't want to talk too long. But basically, this guy was a poor fisherman during the 1800s that lived in a fishing village down there. Him and some of his buddies went out to sea to fish. They got in a storm, and they had to take refuge on an uninhabited island.
Okay.
And they were on this island, I don't know, a couple days when an American whaling ship went by and rescued them. The whaling ship, they then went on to Hawaii. John Manjiro ended up going all the way back to where the whaling ship was from, my home state of Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
Learned English, became fluent in English, and ended up, even though the country was still closed, he was somehow able to re-enter Japan because they realized his English skills would probably be useful. And I think it was, maybe 5 or 6 years later that Commodore Perry showed up with his heavily armed ships. And he played a very important role as being kind of the only true English speaker during the Meiji Resurrection. Yeah. It's like a
I don't know that story. That's fantastic.
He's got a Wikipedia page. But anyways, his hometown's there. You can visit his birthplace, but of course there's a museum. So again, I for that day, I'm setting aside, I don't know how big the museum is, but I'm definitely setting aside an hour or two just in case. So there's all kinds of little things like that along the way.
Well, that's
a good thing about this pilgrimage. It can be religious. You could just visit the temples for the cool architecture and the statues, and maybe do the the historical things. There's so many aspects to this pilgrimage.
Well, and that's the thing, what's really wonderful about the fact that with your current situation is you have the flexibility and the time to be able to suck up those small moments and to be able to deviate from the path and go down to that cape and have birds try to steal your sandwiches, or go to that museum and to just not have to worry. Like, so many of us have these time constraints and we're like, oh geez, I've only got like this time and I got to be back on the job or I got to be back here. So, I mean, I know this for me personally, wanting to walk in different places in Japan, I simply want to just walk. Like, I just want to see Japan.
Walk for the sake of walking.
I want to see Japan by foot. I just want to walk.
Yeah. And it's a great country to walk in. It's safe. There's a great infrastructure. I mean, you're usually in almost every part of Japan. I don't know about Hokkaido, but it feels like you're always half a day or at most a full day's walk away from a train station or some kind of rural bus stop that could take you back to civilization, if you will, for if you need medical attention or there's some kind of emergency. So it really is a great country to walk in.
Cool, yeah.
So for me, one thing I do want to talk about, if I walked with a strict time schedule, if I walked, for me, it would defeat the purpose of doing the walk. That's why I made sure to wait to do this when I had enough time, because it would allow my anxiety, those time constraints, and I've got to do this, and I got it. My whole point of doing this walk, one of the key things, is to lose maybe the anxiety I built up over the years, and kind of frustrations, and having that time. Oh God, I got to walk so many miles today because I got to get to that point. And if I don't get to that point, it means tomorrow I got to walk even more, because then I don't want that kind of mindset. I want that freedom of not having to do that. So.
Yeah. No, those time constraints and deadlines we have in the modern world really cause a lot of stress for us and anxiety. Yeah. I mean, that's where I'm living right now. As the school teachers come up in the end of the school year, everything's like report cards and this and that, and oh my God. And then the school year ends and you're like, oh. So Kevin, I want to plug your social media, just because you do such a great job of sharing these experiences.
Thank you.
Probably the most accessible for people would be your Instagram. Because it's not all about the whole friending process and allowing, when other social media, when they go to your Instagram, they can just follow you. Mine's
100% public. It's not a private account.
So what is your Instagram? And I do have it right here.
It is the Green Hoof. The like the article in English, green like the color, hoof, HOOF. The Green Hoof.
Nice. And
you'll know it's me because you should see a guy with a goofy red beard standing on the Appalachian Trail sign on the top of Mount Katahdin. That's how you know it's me, Kevin Tarpey.
Nice. And I think what I'm going to do, this is probably going to be a two-parter for this podcast. So I'm going to make sure I plug your social media, like both episodes, so that first episode and the second episode, because I want people to follow along. But just so you folks know, again, you go to the Green Hoof. I mean, Kevin will post usually a series of just fantastic photos of different temples and nature and amazing stuff. And you do always write these great posts about what you've seen and where you've been, and often there's like blurbs about the history and things like this. So it's very much like a journal experience with photos. So that's what I like.
I have to do multiple posts on Instagram because I type too much, and there's a limit, a character limit. So that's why. And what I did, I think, when I realized that initially, I kind of toned down what I planned to write. And then I just realized, you know what? Let's just do 2 for this day.
But I'm looking at like one post from just a few days before you finished your trip, and I see a beautiful nature trail. I see what looks like a pitcher plant. I see a land crab. I see beautiful vistas. I see you with a giant ice cream cone, and then I see temples. So there's quite a wonderful variety of things and experiences shared. So for those out there listening, go follow Kevin's Instagram and you can basically join along on this journey. And I know that we're looking at it at my house. I'm showing pictures when we sit down at the table, and I'm like showing like my wife and the kids different pictures, and we're talking about it, and it's making me want to go more. And it was something that was kind of, it's kind of itched the back of my mind before. Again, from seeing those people on Awaji, I should say Akashi, heading towards Awaji Island off on their pilgrimages and wondering, what are these people doing? So,
Well, that's why I try to type, try to have a narrative, because I know besides somebody like yourself who might be interested in doing it, I've got friends and family that will never, ever, I mean, whether they physically could not do it or for whatever reasons, financial reasons. So even though I will be honest, there's some days it almost feels like a little bit of a burden. when I am typing it up and like, what am I doing? This is now the 7th paragraph of this. But when I do get feedback, when people make the comments, that's why it's worth it. Because I know even if it's that one person that just for the brief time they're reading it, they feel like they're there that day, then it's worth it. It's not really a burden.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. It's very cool. Well, Kevin, thank you for taking the time to sit down with us at the podcast again. When I say again, it's because, you know, years ago you were on the Just Japan podcast, and it was very cool. And you're walking again, and you know, I can't wait to have you back on to talk about things once you completed the whole 88 and a trip to Koyasan.
Yes, yeah. And what's funny, before we finish, like I said, I'm hoping my wife can join me. I think she went when she was really young, but it might have been that age where you're not really. So in essence, it'll be kind of like her going for the first time. Yeah. You know, so that it's always good when you go somewhere for the first time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how many places did, like my father, who is a historian, you know, how many places growing up as a kid did he took me to so many amazing historical places in Canada. And I know that he probably explained the significance and the importance to me when I was a young child. And I was like, yeah, okay, Dad. I'm bored. And then, you know, now as an adult who has his own son is a budding young little historian who wants to follow in Grandpa's footsteps. I'm sure I would love to revisit so many of those places through the lens of an adult who has an appreciation for the bigger picture in life.
No, I know. And that's why I can't imagine if I was doing this pilgrim. I'm 43 now. I couldn't imagine doing it maybe if I was 22. I probably would have had many of the same interests, but I don't think my focus would probably be a lot different.
Well, Kevin, all I will say, and I will never go into any details about this, but I knew you 20 years ago. You knew me 20 years ago, and we had a different perspective on life.
Yes, definitely. That's probably the G-rated version. We probably would
have gone and walked maybe a lot of that, but it would have been a different experience.
There would have been much more nights like the one I described. There would have been many more hard days walking, being thirstier than we should have been. Or what time does the train leave?
Exactly right. Oh wow. Yeah. All right, Kevin. Well, good luck on the walk, the rest of your walk. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I know the listeners are really going to appreciate this as well. So good luck, and we'll catch up with you when you finish.
Yeah. Yep. Sometime in June.
Well, a big thank you to Kevin Tarpey for stopping by the Supernatural Japan podcast for 2 episodes to talk to us about his adventures, his incredible experiences. You, of course, heard in great detail how you can follow Kevin on his adventures on Instagram. He's worth a follow. You definitely want to go over there and see what's going on with his journey. And why do you want to go over there? Because he's back at it again. Literally just a couple of days before I uploaded episode number 7, part 1 of this conversation, he was back on the road walking in Shikoku, finishing up his, starting off the second leg of his pilgrimage. So he's out there right now, feet on the road, feet on the pavement, having more adventures, and he's sharing those all on Instagram at The Green Hoof. So go and follow Kevin over at The Green Hoof on Instagram. And yeah, that really does it for this week's episode of the podcast. I'm going to be entering my last week of work. I am an educator. My school year ends on the 27th of May, and I will have a relatively long summer holiday. And unfortunately, due to travel restrictions where I am, we are going to be staying put. We would love to be in Japan with family this holiday, but it's just not in the cards. So that's what's happening with us. So there will be regular episodes coming out throughout the summer of the Supernatural Japan podcast. Again, follow us on Instagram at Supernatural Japan. Come and join the Supernatural Japan Facebook group over at facebook.com/Supernatural Japan. That's where we are. That's where we be living. You can also find me on Twitter, where I tweet a lot of stuff about this podcast, but a lot more about just life in general and education and nature, insects, bugs, spooky things, you name it, over at Mad for Maple on Twitter. All right, well, you know what? Wherever you listen to this podcast, please leave us a fantastic review. It really helps. Please leave us a rating, a great rating, and help us get noticed on Apple Podcasts. Japan is now finally opening up and letting more tourists in. I heard that as of June 1st, 20,000 tourists a day will be allowed to visit. For those of you who can't get there when you would like, you're really excited to get there. Here is some great Japan content for you. If you have friends who plan on going to Japan, share this podcast with them and get more Japan loving, history loving ears on this podcast. All right, guys. Well, that does it for another episode of the podcast. We'll be back really soon with episode number 9. So wherever you are in the world, I hope you're happy, hope you're healthy, and I hope you're being spooky. All right. Bye-bye.